that all began in 1988 when Dottie came to the Kellogg Foundation with a problem. And it was a real problem. Michigan had a network of community foundations that was not at all comprehensive. Most of them were south of a line drawn between Muskegon on Lake Michigan and Saginaw on Lake Huron. And even in that part of the state that was richly endowed with community foundations, there were gaps. There were places that had no coverage whatsoever, and lots of places that had weak little community foundations, teeny tiny ones. And of course, once you get north of that, in the lower peninsula, not many, and once you get to the upper peninsula, practically none. So Dottie needed help in filling those gaps, building new community foundations, strengthening the existing ones that were teeny tiny. And Russ listened very carefully to it and said, well, you know, I understand that, but the Kellogg Foundation is mainly about youth. What could you do to improve the lives of young people by this project? And I don't know if Russ thought that was a very polite way of saying no, if there was no way that this project could do that, or if he had some sort of inkling. But when Dottie came back, and this would have been the brain trust of Dottie, Russ, Pete Ellis working together. When Dottie came back, it was with this absolutely incredible plan to put challenge grants out to any community that wanted to build a community foundation from scratch, or any community that wanted to increase the size of its existing community foundation. And the rules were very simple. The Kellogg Foundation would do a 1-for-2 match. So if a community wanted to get $100,000 from the Kellogg Foundation, they had to raise $200,000 locally. But the rule was the Kellogg money had to be endowed in a youth field of interest fund, and the income from that fund had to go to support a youth advisory committee, a committee that initially was at least 50% young people. And that income would make grants. The kids could make grants. The money they raised locally, they could endow in any way they wanted to endow. But so that made it real. And in community after community, you heard the same thing. It's challenge grants, it's money coming from outside our community. We're used to sending our money to Lansing or to Washington. We're not used to having anyone invest in Hillsdale or, Iron Mountain or any of the other locations. So we had this incredible stroke of good fortune in hiring Kathy Agard to run the program. I still remember Dottie coming to me and saying, I found the perfect person to run this project. And little did I know how right she was with that. But what happened essentially then was that these communities went out there because they wanted to build their community foundations, and the youth advisory committees were just sort of a requirement that was put on. But once they saw these kids in action, it sort of stopped being a bothersome requirement and became a source of pride, because the kids made incredible grant makers. And in fact, we dropped that initial 50% youth requirement and made it virtually 100% youth, because the adults on the committee were only getting in the way of the kids. But that has been just a phenomenally successful program, now technically ended. More than 23 community foundations started last I knew. There have been, tens of thousands of kids who've gone through YACs and been trained as grant makers. And now, no matter where you live in the state of Michigan, if you live in the middle of the Upper Peninsula or in the heart of downtown Detroit, you are represented by a community foundation. The whole state is covered.